Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of the Stronger Together podcast with ACSI. We're looking forward to the Secure and Sound Mental Health Symposium. That's May 1st in Denver. If you're not able to be there in Denver, there is a virtual option as well. So we're hoping to make sure everyone knows about this event. You're going to hear from Dr. Adam Wilson shortly here on the podcast. He's one of the speakers at that event. He's with Denver Seminary. He also has his PhD from Regent University and a master's in counseling from Denver Seminary. He knows a lot about the data and how Christian schools can understand the data, and will provide some really helpful information. So here is Dr. Adam Wilson.
This one's very, very dear to my heart, this topic. I've been a child adolescent counselor for 20 years plus now, and doing research in schools and having my own kids in the school systems, understanding kind of the state of youth mental health right now is a passion of mine, but it's also, I think, become a growing need and desire for educators, counselors, youth pastors. Everybody's recognized the spike in mental health issues among youth in the past 20 years, really. But really in the past 10 years, we've seen a significant increase in anxiety and depression and suicidality, levels of addiction to technology, or just kind of the struggles that kids are having with identity. So there's just a massive amount of pressure on kids, and then subsequently to those of us who are in support roles for kids. At the symposium, I'm going to kind of kick things off with a big picture overview of like, where are we with the state of youth mental health right now? It's a fast changing thing. Obviously a lot of concerning things to look at, but there's also some glimmers of hope in some of the effort and the work when we intentionally, directly, and structurally go after supporting youth wellness and youth mental health. We see a very positive impact. So what we do in schools, what we do in the counseling office, what we do youth groups, what we do is making a difference, but we really need to be targeted and knowledgeable about what we're doing. So kind of the purpose of the symposium overall is to equip educators as a kind of primary group, but also school-based mental health folks, counselors working out with youth, again, pastors, youth pastors. The goal here would be like, let's get the best information out to folks who are working alongside our Christian schools and our educators to help them know how can we get after, and what do we need to get after related to youth mental health. So that'll be my job, is to kind of kick off things with this large picture level set on the research of what we know at this point, what's contributing, what's helping.
That's good. Now, for educators who care about their students' mental well-being, their safety, but don't necessarily have tools in their tool belt, they haven't equipped themselves, haven't taken steps, what sort of things may they be missing that you would hope, hey, I really want to equip you in this area? I'm sure you could talk for a long time about that, but just an initial thing or two to kind of give them a sense of where they could start being even more equipped to then help their students.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we first started doing research, and I run a research initiative that goes alongside public-private charter schools, and we just started asking how we could help support student wellness and student mental health, like support them as they were doing this work. And as we interacted with a lot of our private school partners, one of the things that stood out immediately was they all had a deep passion for protecting and helping and supporting the kids. There was no deficit there. But there's just a massive question mark around, like, what exactly are the struggles? Like, what are the things? We know they're anxious. They're telling us they're anxious. We see the kids that are really struggling with suicidality. When things are at their extreme, there was an awareness of things, but what are the underlying issues? What are the things that are underneath those that we need to be getting after as a community? And so I think that's one of the key things, is first being aware of, one, what's the culture within our school and within our community around student wellness and mental health. And there's been so much controversy and kind of pressure on all sides politically around these topics that it's gotten very hard and confusing, especially for administrators in Christian schools, but for everybody to know, like, what's really actually taking place that's leading to these scary numbers and these struggles that we're seeing. So I think the first thing is first of all, just knowing what are the underlying factors, we would say in the research language, what are the underlying factors of these things. Within that, there's a whole lot, like you said, I could talk for a long time about all that's in there. I think the second most important thing that stands out to me is, particularly for our Christian school partners, is that what we do when it comes to addressing wellness needs to be grounded in our theology, needs to be grounded in a basis for how we understand what God's definition of wellness is. Because often we've separated out in our culture this idea of like mental health is something that's out here, and then we talk about maybe our spiritual wellness or our character development over here. But the reality of these things are one. How is it that we can ground our theology, our programming in our theology? So we would call that a theology of ministry, which is one of the things that'll be talked about here at the symposium. And then honestly, a third one is more logistical. It's more strategic. If schools don't yet have policies and procedures in place on how to manage crisis, how to manage when students are in some level of danger or expressing things that raise concerns about their safety or the safety of others, those are things that schools have to have in place at this point. There is nobody else who's going to be tracking those risks within the school system. And so we have to set up these policies and procedures, which ultimately is a huge protector of the burnout and the emotional drain that hits educators surrounding this topic, because they're just running around putting out fires, versus when we have some structured approaches to how we manage these things. Still stressful, still hard, but it's more effective, and there's more of a flow of how we know how to handle this, and then just designated folks to do that.
That's good insight. Let's close with a thought on kind of the opportunities that Christian schools have. If there's anything you have thoughts on it, with Christian schools being able to speak to the entire child's well-being in ways that other schools can't necessarily do. Are there any insights with the research you're privy to, experiences you have to kind of speak into how Christian schools overall are doing and the opportunities they have to really help kids flourish in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a story of kind of some very high highs and some harder things. We're at the symposium, we'll be presenting some of the results of the research that our group at Denver Seminary did alongside ACSI, as well as presented with Dr. Lynn Swanner from Cardis. And when we look at the research that we found, kind of talking to ACSI schools and their views and their perspectives and their policies around mental health, some things stood out, which we'll end up talking about at the symposium. But some of those things being that overall, when schools are placing emphasis on mental health and mental wellness within these Christian schools, there is an extremely positive effect. It creates like a community, a culture that values wellness. And so that's infectious. That's something that is affecting the teachers and the parents and the kids and the educators. So there's some really, really positive things in there. I think on the harder side of things is a recognition that there is a lack of consistency across the Christian school world, how schools are trying to address this, whether they are or are not directly trying to address it. If they are, in what ways. You have some schools that are highly structured and equipped and have personnel assigned and policies and procedures, departments. You have other folks that have really nothing in place, not because they don't care, but just because they either haven't had the funding or haven't had the knowledge base of like, how do we even start that? Or is that even our job? Is that our role? Good questions to ask. And then you have probably the majority of folks in the middle who have some elements in place, some structures to dealing with, say, like suicide evaluations, things like that. And yet maybe less on the proactive side of how do we get ahead of the struggles in developing the wellness that we want to see, not just addressing illness or crisis, but how do we promote the wellness that decreases those other concerning factors. So I'd say looking across the Christian schools, there's no absence of heart and desire to help. There is an absence of structure in some schools. But I think there's a growing sense of intentionality and purpose, which is, again, part of why we're putting this on, is to help equip all of the above, all the folks who are starting from nothing, all the way to the folks who have fairly advanced services. We want to kind of provide a good set of data and resources for them.
Well, to register for the Secure and Sound Mental Health Symposium, you can visit acsi.org/secure. Transitioning to a different event coming up, also not too far from now, June 15th through the 17th, is the Rooted Educator Worldview Summit in Colorado Springs. We're going to hear shortly from Elizabeth Urbanowicz. She'll be one of the speakers there at Rooted. She's with Foundation Worldview, helping equip kids to understand the truth of the Christian worldview. So that's pretty spot on for what Rooted is all about. I think you'll enjoy hearing her perspective and what she's talking about, and continuing to grow in biblical worldview integration in each and every classroom of Christian schools. So here is Elizabeth Urbanowicz.
Well, every generation faces a big question that's just culturally the hot button topic of the moment. And for the students that are currently in our classroom, that question is surrounding identity. What does it mean to be human? Who gets to decide what it means to be human? And what do we do with our definition of humanity? And so, what I'm going to be focusing on during our time at Rooted is how do we help our students understand the biblical framework for what it means to be human? And then, practically, how do they live that out in their everyday lives? Because we need to start first with that theological grounding, then get really practical. And then finally, we're going to look at what are some of the big cultural lies that are really coming after our students at the moment, and how do we equip them to not only recognize these lies, but to recognize the error in them so that they don't fall prey to them. So it's going to be a real practical time of looking at where are we in this cultural moment? How does God's word speak to this? And what can we practically do in the classroom to equip our students to live faithfully in this time and culture?
Yeah, that's great. Very, very important. So absolutely touching on some of the most critical things for Christian educators. Is there anything within that that really especially gets you jazzed, some topic in there? Maybe it's one practical tidbit that you especially really want educators to hear. I'm sure they'll still get a lot more in Colorado Springs, but anything in particular where you really want to make sure they get this across in Colorado Springs?
Yes, well, I think we talk a lot in Christian education about helping our students understand that they're made in God's image. And that is so foundational. But I think sometimes what we miss out on is helping our students understand that their identity is objectively defined. That means that they don't get to define who they are, that has already been defined for them by their creator. But what we really need to help them understand is that this is actually a freeing thing, that we don't bear the weight of having to curate some subjective identity that someone or some circumstance can take from us, but that we have this objective identity that no matter who we are or what we're capable of or incapable of, that we have the gift of being created in God's image. So I'm really excited to dive down with educators into what that means, and then practically, how can we help our students from the youngest of ages understand this and live this out?
That's great. Now, a lot of what you do is helping parents learn what to share with their children. So it's already kind of breaking it down the line, indirectly. And with educators, they're helping students build biblical worldview, but also hopefully partnering with parents doing the same, not to mention the church. Do you have any advice or just kind of thoughts on the role of educators as they hopefully partner with parents, and their role of what it looks like for biblical worldview and foundational worldview, hopefully with the parents and their role of what they can do in the classroom day in and day out?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is one that I really strongly encourage Christian educators to think about even more and to really dive down into how can we challenge and encourage and equip the parents of our students. Because when we look at scripture, we see that God has given the primary role of discipleship to the parents. Now, the parents are graciously allowing us as Christian educators to partner with them. And so if we try to take on all of that role ourselves, we're working outside of God's design. And so we're working in an impossibly broken system. So at the Rooted conference, I am going to be specifically talking with educators about how can we partner with parents in very practical ways so that we don't bear the weight of this on our own, because it's a weight that God did not design us to bear. And then what are some practical ways that we can equip the parents of our students to really disciple their children at home so that what we're doing at school is complementing what is being done in the home?
You can register for the Rooted Educator Worldview Summit at acsi.org/rooted. Thanks so much again for tuning in to the Stronger Together podcast.